Let me start by saying this. I consider myself to be a lot less judgmental than most pilots I encounter around the field. Pretty much as long as you keep flying your plane safely and talk on the radio in something resembling English, then I consider you a pretty good pilot. That being said, there are a lot of pilots out there who take particular offense to poor radio phraseology, and I'll admit that I notice it too. There's nothing particularly dangerous about any of these issues we'll be looking at today, but it would certainly be nice if these habits were to go away, so I'll do my part by sharing my thoughts with you from around the field, and I'll hopefully inspire us all to become better pilots, whatever that means to you. Let's start with a few of the most common pilot slang words that I hear over the radio, such as "in the box," "here comes the flash," or "we've got 'em on the fish finder." I might even be guilty of saying some of these on occasion myself, but they're not proper phraseology, and you never know when some controller might be having a bad day and decide to yell at you for it, or even worse, when a new pilot might not understand what you're saying and get confused. They might sound cool to new pilots, but imagine being a controller who hears each of these 100 times a day after you've been training for years to speak as by the book as possible. Number 2, airport advisories. Assuming you follow the Aeronautical Information Manual, or the AIM, there is a simple way that aircraft at non-towered airports are supposed to communicate, and asking "any traffic in the area please advise" is not part of it. Non-towered communications are a little bit like playing Marco Polo. We all announce what we're doing, and if somebody new joins in, we play call and response until everybody knows what's going on. Asking for traffic to respond is a fruitless effort in my opinion, because we're all supposed to do it anyway, and if someone really is not using their radios like we've seen on my channel before, they're probably not going to care just because you asked nicely. What runway are you using, or asking for an airport advisory are also not particularly helpful in my opinion, unless you know someone just landed or just departed and you're asking them directly what conditions they found on the ground. Just wait for a response from other traffic like above, or use the tools you are given to make your own decision. Number 3, this one always makes me laugh whenever I hear it. Either someone is decimal happy, like Cessna 121 Papa Papa is 13.1657 miles to the southeast, or they're calling it an excessive distance. 121 Papa Papa is on a 15-mile final. In the first case, I think we can all agree that those decimals really don't matter, since they don't aid a pilot or tower in finding you in the sky, and they've already changed since you began your radio call, even for the slowest of airplanes. In the latter case, I've conducted entire flights that weren't 15 miles long, so I don't really consider it to be within the scope of a non-towered airport's traffic area. On the other hand, if you're perhaps on an IFR approach, saying which one provides some additional context. And if you've been lined up for the runway since your departure point, then perhaps you were actually on final the whole time. Number 4, and Mansfield traffic? This is definitely the most common and least egregious, but it still annoys a lot of pilots and controllers. Prefacing your every call with some guttural noise, or and or is a verbal crutch. It's easy to get into the habit of, and really hard to break because it's buried so deep in our psyche. Voice actors will often do the same thing when portraying multiple characters, as watchers of The Simpsons or Rick and Morty will know quite notoriously. Morty. Interestingly enough, there are other psychological related tics and crutches that pilots develop, usually involving air traffic control, and they can be quite amusing if you know what you're looking for, but that's a discussion for a different video. Number 5, a few of these are only common when talking to en route controllers, such as hearing altitudes abbreviated with a decimal, leaving 4.5, climbing for 5.5, or contacting a controller on a new frequency by saying "with you" or "checking in." If you're checking in and you're going to be with them, it's pretty redundant. Lastly, this is probably the most dangerous of all these radio calls. Improper traffic sightings, like saying "no joy" when you don't have the traffic in sight. Controllers misunderstanding pilots when calling out traffic has been a contributing factor in several high-profile aviation accidents, most famously Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 182 that caused the untimely death of 144 people over San Diego. Number 6. Another uncontrolled airfield folly that I hear often is referring to the Common Traffic Advisory frequency as Unicom. Unicom is a per-airport frequency used for ground operations or airport advisories, not communicating between aircraft. And they're usually listed side by side in the airport directory, so it's especially important for new pilots to know which one they need to communicate with other traffic. Similarly, announcing "clear of the active" when exiting a runway doesn't carry much meaning, since at an uncontrolled airfield, anyone can choose to land anywhere, anytime. Not to start any arguments, but even if the guy on the actual Unicom tells you to use one runway or do anything else, you don't have to listen. They're not an air traffic controller, and you, the pilot in command, has the final say of all actions in the traffic pattern as long as they are done in the best interest of safety. And finally, number 7. I've kept what is most likely the most controversial for last, and I really want to hear what you guys have to say in the comments section below. This one really depends on who taught you to fly and the culture of the airport you fly at most often. My personal preference is to announce myself at uncontrolled airfields like this. Mansfield Traffic Warrior 8027 Foxtrot is 5 miles to the west, will be entering on the 45 to left downwind runway 32 Mansfield, and then abbreviating to 27 Foxtrot just as a controller would. You'll hear others announce with their aircraft type and color, such as Worcester Traffic, you got a red and white Cessna on final runway 29er. Even though the first way is the only way that appears in the AIM, they both have their merit. I've been told that examiners like to hear you use your full call sign, but there's obviously a benefit to including your color. Despite the fact that most airplanes are white, and you can never see the detail stripes, it's definitely helpful in some oddball cases, like a green camouflage plane flying over thick trees. Those who advocate using a full call sign usually cite the high probability of having 2 red and white Cessnas at one airfield at a given time, and the usage of radio recordings to identify aircraft either in the case of an incident or to charge landing fees. It's a common practice for pilots who are used to landing fees to avoid using their full call sign, thus avoiding the bill, but you're actually doing a disservice to the aviation community at large. Not only does your money go into making airports better, but when an airport manager listens to radio tapes, they're also recording the total amount of traffic and reporting it to the state. If they miss your airplane often, the airport is likely to get less money from the state. If that trend continues, your favorite airport might go the same way as almost half of the airports in my home state. Gone with the wind. One thing is certain about all these radio communications, though. If you're a Piper Cub, I'm going to assume you're yellow. Until next time on the Friendly Skies channel, everyone, squawk VFR and have fun.